Welcome to DeFi by Design, where we talk all things blockchain and cryptocurrency while striving to educate, empower, and enrich.
Andy is a crypto investor and believer since early 2017, after he discovered Bitcoin through the University of Florida's Blockchain Club. Since his time at UF, he's founded a few successful internet businesses and went full-time into entrepreneurship in 2019. A strong believer in decentralization and fair opportunity, Andy is aiming to educate, empower, and enrich as many people as possible through the permissionless system we know as DeFi. Rob started playing poker with Bitcoin in 2015 and hasn't looked back. Since discovering Bitcoin, he dove headfirst into the world of crypto, first by trading, then immersing himself in blockchain application, decentralization, and financial game theory. While pursuing a math and philosophy dual major at university, he launched a successful algo trading fund and helped push the University Blockchain Club to new levels. Our vision is to onboard billions into DeFi and totally disrupt the corrupted system of central banks and power as we know it. With education, we will close the information gap and bring DeFi to the masses.
What's going on, guys? Real quick break for the DeFi by Design podcast sponsors and a DeFi Slate sponsors who make this all possible. First, we have Aave, a money market protocol that allows you to borrow and lend and leverage your assets to earn interest. So if you want to deposit some stable coins in there, currently you can get 3, 4, 5, 6, 8% APYs on stable coins, which oust any bank in the world. As far as we're concerned, you can deposit any Ethereum-based asset that is listed there, borrow against it. You can borrow stable coins. You can borrow other assets like ETH or YFI, Link, even the 𝗷𝗶 token itself. Aave is the go-to protocol for any sort of borrowing and lending. Check it out at app.aave.com. Next one we have is Oxys. Oxys is a new crypto wallet, oxys.com. You can store all of your crypto there. They have quite a few options. They're integrating new DEX features soon and allow you to have a non-custodial way to store your crypto safely off of centralized exchanges and also just not in a MetaMask or in your own ledger. A bit of extra security there. Next, we have MCDEX. MCDEX is a decentralized perpetual swap protocol, basically allowing you to trade on leverage on the Ethereum chain, right? They're coming out with V3 very soon. By the time you're listening to this, it might already be out. They are a super solid team, and they're pumping updates and allowing you to trade decentralized perpetual swaps on ETH, Link, and a few others, all on Ethereum, all decentralized. So that is MCDEX. Next, we have 𝗵𝗶𝗴𝗵 is a decentralized stablecoin. It's an algorithmic stablecoin that is pegged to the purchasing power of commodities. And basically, it measures what value $1 buys in terms of a commodity index each week. And then it provides you with essentially a store of value that allows you to continuously evade inflation while maintaining, a stable aspect as if it was $1. And that is the 𝗵𝗶𝗴 protocol. Check them out on Twitter. Finally, we have Deversifi. It is an L2 decentralized exchange. They allow you to basically trade in a gasless and feeless manner, big volumes, whatever quantities you need. It's almost like a centralized exchange on Ethereum, but you are the custodian. They do not hold your coins as a centralized exchange would. You have full control, full power. So really, it's almost like a centralized exchange capabilities on a decentralized exchange, and that is Deversifi. All those sponsors make this possible. I know it's a lot to take in, but thank you very much for listening, and let's get back to it. What's going on, guys? Welcome to DeFi by Design podcast. Here today with co-host Robbie, of course, and Will Harborne from Deversifi. Excited to learn more about what's going on in the layer 2 scaling world. Things are heating up. Today is July 13th. It was my birthday 2 days ago. I just turned 22. And yeah, it's been about a year now through DeFi Slate. So it's been a great year. And we've been hearing a lot about layer 2 ever since kind of the creation of DeFi Slate, what it could bring, what the possibilities are. And it seems like we're inching ever closer as each day goes by. So excited to learn more about what's going on in that realm and hear from Will. So pass it over to Robbie. What's going on?
Yeah, brother, doing well. Happy birthday. I think it is the first podcast we've done since then. So definitely been a wild ride this past year. I'm stoked for the next year and even more after that. And I think you're right. Layer 2 has always been talked about since DeFi began. Back then, it was almost kind of mythical. It was like this possibility, this like idealized image of Ethereum and DeFi that was almost unobtainable because at the time gas was so high and transaction fees were so expensive. But now that vision is becoming a reality with projects like Deversifi. So we talk a lot, about the different scaling solutions, Polygon, Optimism, Arbitrum. So those, I'm sure we'll talk about a bit with Will here, but also the features and aspects that are enabled through L2, I think we'll get into as well in terms of order book trading and just different abilities that are unlocked once we have layer 2 live. So I'll pass it over to Will and let him introduce himself, and we can kick off this L2 wave.
Thanks very much. Happy birthday to you, and happy birthday to the DeFi Slate. It sounds like it's a year going, so awesome. So I'm Will, I'm the founder of Deversifi. It's a layer 2 scaling solution, but it's very much an application-specific layer 2 scaling solution. So as you were saying, people have been talking about this mythical state of how Ethereum is going to scale. And often people think of scaling solutions like Optimism and Arbitrum, which are all about deploying, and these don't kind of technically exist for most users yet, and they're not kind of on mainnet, but allow you to deploy anything, any smart contract, an application to be used and kind of feel the same as Ethereum, really flexible. Here with Deversifi, we're talking about something a bit different, which is application specific. So it's really tailored to doing DeFi and some very specific applications, but it's already here live now. So actually, Deversifi has been live for a year. There are 1 or 2 other application-specific scaling solutions that have been live for a year, like Loopring, which you may have heard of. And this is kind of the first wave of layer 2 that we're already seeing today. We launched it June last year, so really kind of just turning 1 now.
Sweet. And so when we hear layer 2, there's all sorts of different protocols and solutions being rolled out. What are kind of the 2 or 3 primary layer 2 solutions available, in terms of rollups or sidechains? Where do you guys fit in there?
Yeah, so it's quite a tough question because there are lots of things out there that are at different stages of development. Some things are on like a test net, so you can technically build on them, but you can't use it with like real funds and real applications. Other things are live today, and then I think the biggest distinction I would make is between EVM, EVM scaling solutions, where you can deploy any smart contract. So Polygon, Arbitrum, Optimism, all fit in that avenue. And most of those, with the exception of Polygon, aren't really live today. And then on the other side, we have these application-specific scaling solutions. And I think most of the ones that are live today are using ZK rollups, or in our case, for Deversifi, we actually work with Starkware, and there's a number of other applications that are using Starkware's scaling solution, which include like 𝗬𝗭𝗽𝗋 and 𝗵𝗶𝗴𝗵, which is for NFTs. And all of these are very much like tailored, so you can't just deploy anything you want on there if you're a developer, but if you're a user, you get the benefit of layer 2 today, and everything is basically requires no gas to interact with DeFi or trade or whatever it is you want to do, but you still have all the benefits of not having to, basically holding all your funds in your MetaMask and being able to do everything you want to do in DeFi. So that's kind of like one direction to look at it. And then the other is in terms of different types of scaling solution. So there are like ZK rollups, which use cryptographic security in terms of how you secure the scaling solution. And then there's different terms you can use for it, but let's say optimistic, where you're relying on some game theoretical principles to provide security. And these include like Optimism and some others, which have a slightly different compromise on speed and security and efficiency, but kind of still achieve the overall same thing for the end users of Ethereum and DeFi.
Yeah,
and Deversifi is very much like in that ZK rollup camp and the application-specific camp.
Gotcha. Yeah, so taking a step back, for anyone who's listening that might be a little overwhelmed by all the layer 2 complexities that are circulating around. So we have right now some of the side chains, which is like Polygon and Binance Smart Chain, that are deployed now, and people have been interacting with them. And Will, you touched on this. You mentioned Evm compatibility. For anyone that doesn't know, that means Ethereum Virtual Machine, which means that the Ethereum code is transferable across these different chains. So if it is EVM compatible, it's very easy to switch between different networks and basically deploy that Ethereum code across different layer 2s because they're all compatible. And then you touched on ZK technology, which is the way I kind of think about it is kind of I call it hard math versus soft math, where ZK, zero knowledge proofs, are more of that computational hard math. It works And, there's a reason to point to why it works. Whereas roll-ups are more of like a soft math. You kind of nudge people in the right direction by setting up the system in a certain way. And it's in their best interest to act in this certain way that maintains the system. Whereas that hard math basically locks in, that system. So you guys are working on that ZK technology, and you mentioned that application specific side chains are starting to roll out, which is, to me, at least different from these different side chains that try to be like a one-fits-all type of layer 2 solution. I'm curious what you think in terms of the direction that we're heading as more layer 2s start to come out. Do you think we're going to see very segmented layer 2s that are application specific and they fall into different niches? And, certain applications, if they're part of this demographic, all are on the same chain? Or do you think more of the holistic approach that Polygon and Binance chain are taking, where, they want to have access and allow all applications to exist? Which approach do you think is better for the ecosystem? And, if it's better or not, which direction do you think we're headed in?
I think, by the way, that was an awesome description with the hard and soft maths. And also, I think an important distinction to make is, you mentioned, I think, Binance Smart Chain and Polygon a few times. And I think the interesting thing about both of those is they give a layer 2-like experience. But I wouldn't necessarily, I think a lot of people might say that they're not really layer 2s because they have lower security than Ethereum and lower security than using DeFi on Ethereum. But they feel like what I think the future layer 2 experience will be, because it's much cheaper, it's much more accessible to a lot of people, has the benefits that you get, but you do compromise on security, and that may mean that in the long term, they're not the most sustainable solutions and other things will replace them. But going back to your question, which specifically was, will these flexible open solutions kind of evolve, or will some, more niche applications like Deversifi end up being most used?
Right, like a holistic approach versus a segmented approach.
Exactly, yeah. I kind of think of it in that right now, actually almost everyone in DeFi is an early adopter. The numbers of people who are using even Uniswap, one of the most used DeFi applications in the world, is really low. It's like, less than, it's maybe 1 or 2 million users. It's hard to know because some people have multiple addresses. And that is still really tiny. And it's even smaller if you look at other kind of lending applications or like Polygon, Binance, everything else. What this kind of shows is that right now, if you're providing a lot of flexibility, so that people can do all kinds of crazy yield farming, trading derivatives, maybe some like new algorithmic stablecoin, that's what people want because they're early adopters. They're going to try everything. It needs to have as much flexibility as possible. And actually, kind of almost the end users of the layer 2 scaling solutions or side chains and everything else are developers, because they can deploy things as easily as possible and then anyone can try them. And that's really cool. It's great for the stage of like the ecosystem that we're at, because people are just trying everything. We're learning really fast. People are creating stuff and people are making a lot of money, and that's exciting. But kind of 2 or 3 years from now, if we imagine how DeFi will be, and let's say now it's 50 million people around the world who are starting to use DeFi to manage their finances, to earn interest, to trade, buy crypto. I think we start to see quite a different sort of set of applications emerge. And flexibility isn't so important anymore, because once we have a larger number of people using this stuff, if you imagine like most of your friends who maybe aren't so familiar with crypto, that they don't want to go into like some crazy yield farm where they have a 50% chance of doubling their money, but they could also like have the rug pulled out of the farm and like lose everything. They're probably more likely to do quite a small number of things, which is trade, basically buy and sell different tokens, probably like the larger ones, maybe a few riskier ones occasionally, participate in some like ICOs, or rather like initial DEX offerings, like via Binance launch pools or whatever it is. And they're probably going to want to earn some yield on their funds that they already own, and maybe transfer tokens to their friends or like make payments, a few other things. But it's probably not going to be that much more than that. And so with Deversifi in particular, what we're doing is building a really tailored platform for those actions. So we're kind of selecting what we think the more mainstream users of DeFi will want to do. And then rather than trying to make it as flexible as possible so anyone can build anything, we're making it as efficient as possible. So the gas cost is almost zero for those types of actions. So if you want to transfer to someone else on Deversifi, it's basically free. If you want to make a trade, you pay some like cost for the liquidity, but there's no gas cost to Ethereum for doing that. If you want to earn interest on Compound via Deversifi, you don't pay any gas cost for it either. And so suddenly like DeFi becomes really accessible for those people because we've basically built something that it can't do everything, but it can do the things that most people want to do really efficiently on layer 2 without paying gas. And it could do it for millions of people rather than just a few thousand at the same time. Otherwise, like gas costs become like $50. So suddenly it makes DeFi much more accessible. And I think that's where a lot of these scaling solutions will end up. Right now, I think it's, for the next year, we're probably going to see a lot more of these holistic ones where you can try anything and deploy anything. But then as the ecosystem grows, we'll settle into like many different types of very tailored, efficient scaling solutions like Deversifi, which really focus on just one or two things and do those as well as possible. And then there might be another application where you can do something else, but again, which is like tailored for that.
Gotcha. Yeah, it definitely seems like the imminent scaling is just basically bringing the Ethereum experience to other chains that are just easier to use, basically incentivizing with some liquidity mining and then just calling it scaling, whereas this multi-year outlook kind of promotes a more robust, ecosystem of parts that are all able to work together. And we have to think about, bridges that come into mind here. I think Hop Protocol, as of today, has just launched their first bridge that basically allows you to take funds from Polygon to Ethereum or to XDAI. And right now it's just USDC, but it's within 30 seconds. And so I think on a multi-year approach with the capabilities of these bridges that allow you to go from one place to another instantly, with the added liquidity, the segmented approach, then becomes more of a hedge to protect your own risks, right? So you've got your funds on the Ethereum mainnet, and you use this bridge to go from here to Polygon or to here, to other chains. Right, and then you can also have funds on Optimism, on the Arbitrum, right? So there's all sorts of like hedges in terms of creating a portfolio for yourself. But realistically, as you said, Will, the common user of DeFi is most likely going to be in one place where it's the cheapest and there's the most liquidity, right? And so I'm curious who you think is the current winner of the kind of scaling war, if you will, right now. Whether it be one of these upcoming solutions or a side chain now or a protocol, right? I know you're a bit biased with good old Deversifi, but who do you think is the winner of this current scaling war? And, how do you see the competition starting to kind of stack up and, who's going to win?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, but it's a little bit too early to call probably the kind of winner. And actually, my personal view is probably more close to what you were describing at the start, which is that we will have a multi-chain ecosystem. I think things like Hop Protocol, Connect, and others will become the norm. And actually the user experience. So I mean, in many ways, actually what Deversifi is building, currently we've built everything on one solution, which is StarkX, which is built by Starkware, mainly because it's the only thing that's alive today. And actually Deversifi, I would say today, does have the best liquidity on layer 2 anywhere. If you want to trade ETH or wrap Bitcoin, Deversifi is the cheapest place to do it. And you get better prices than you would on Uniswap. You get better prices than you would on any other layer 2. But that, I think, is because we're still early. And things like Optimism and Arbitrum that you mentioned have hardly launched. They're just getting started. But I think in the future, and not too far away from now, things will become quite fragmented. Liquidity will be on many different side chains. I mean, if you go to Polygon already, we can see exactly how that's happening. Same with Binance Smart Chain. And so the end user experience, I think, will have to be multi-chain. And so almost, I think users aren't going to care which underlying layer 2 scaling solution they're on. They're going to want to interact with DeFi wherever it is at the best prices, as seamlessly as possible, move between them instantly using these bridge technologies. Bridges are going to be essential for DeFi to feel seamless. And I think, it's not just Ethereum layer 2s, but there's an entire ecosystem. I mean, personally, I very much believe Ethereum will be almost like the core settlement layer for a lot of this. But we're seeing really interesting ecosystems emerge in the Cosmos world, in Polkadot ecosystem, Solana, and that's just going to continue because it's a great place for people to experiment, and there are lots of new and interesting things happening there. And so I think ultimately what Deversifi wants to build is almost a portal to that. So once you have your funds in Deversifi, you can access many different layer twos. You can trade on Uniswap, on Arbitrum, and then you can invest in via Compound and everything else, all from the Deversifi UI, seamlessly moving between these different chains. And I think we're obviously a way off from that, mainly because lots of these layer two solutions haven't launched yet. But that is, I think, how people will want to interact with it. They're not going to want to, as they kind of maybe do now, open 5 different tabs and like use a bridge and then go to something on Polygon and then use another bridge and go to something on 𝗪 and maybe like make a mistake with the transaction, so they have to like pay for it 3 times. They're just going to want a seamless interaction, and they're not going to want to even know maybe which layer 2 they're on sometimes.
I think that is, I agree with that sentiment, that really what you said is accurate, that people and users don't really care which L2 that they're on. They just want the best one for the use case that they're solving. So if that means trading, it's, where's the best price and where's the least amount of slippage. If they're betting, it means it's, what sportsbook has the best line on the game tonight. So there's a few different reasons why you would want to check different layer 2s for the most effective price or listing, which I think is going to be important as we start to onboard into less crypto native applications. So if there is a better price on Cosmos than on Uniswap, then maybe if it's a big trade, you want to do half of your order Cosmos and half of it on Ethereum's main chain. People are going to want to access that kind of liquidity, and ultimately, that makes a more efficient market by identifying those misfires, those arbitrages. So, Andy, to kind of answer your question, I think the winners of the L2 race are really going to be these not holistic chains that try to tap into all the different applications, but I think it's going to be the more complete tech stacks that have maybe their own independent application chain. But in addition to that, they also have a bridge and they have an order book and they aggregate liquidity from different areas. So, what that looks like might be Deversifi. If you guys have your own chain and you're able to tap into different liquidity, like, aggregate liquidity from Binance Chain and Polygon and Optimism and pool it all into one exchange, I think that is going to be probably the leader of the L2 race eventually, because it's all organized into one place. And really that, to me, is what makes up whether a protocol is going to win or lose. It's their community. And if they can keep their community all in-house under one roof, I think they maintain a lot more of their community that way, and it ends up growing along with the protocol.
Yeah, I completely agree with most of that. And in Deversifi's case, that is similar. That's kind of the approach that we've taken very much. So right now, Deversifi actually started with order books on layer 2. So it was kind of it felt very much in some ways like a centralized exchange, but where you connect your wallet, MetaMask, Ledger, whatever, and trade. And it's really evolved since then, and kind of as really kind of driven by our community as it's evolved. The Deversifi community is growing really fast and like really strong at the moment, particularly given that we just like literally last week launched our governance token, Dvf. And so one of the things we've really had from feedback is that people want to do more, and they actually want to access liquidity from layer 1 as well within layer 2. So if you like, one of the most interesting examples of that is we have this Compound integration. And in the case of Deversifi, Compound didn't like develop something new and launch it on Deversifi's layer 2. Actually, instead, the way it works is that if you have USDT, for example, on Deversifi and you want to put it into Compound to earn yield, let's say like 4 or 5% yield, it's not like crazy amounts, but it's pretty good compared to most of the world. You actually sort of make that deposit on layer 2, don't pay any gas for it. But then after a certain amount of these deposits, there's a single transaction made on layer 1 to access the main liquidity pool for Compound. So, at certain points when gas prices are high, if let's say you have $2,000 and you want to deposit into Compound on layer 1 on Ethereum, that could cost you $50. So it's kind of, you lose most of the interest you might earn just by making the deposit, and then you have to withdraw at the end too. Whereas when you do it on Deversifi, it's free, because Deversifi can then aggregate all those deposits together and make a single one and access the main liquidity pool on Ethereum layer 1. And I think that's how many layer 2s will continue to develop, is that end users only really will end, maybe even 6 months from now, will only really use layer 2s. But a lot of the end liquidity might still come from layer 1, particularly big Uniswap pools, Compound, Aave, other protocols might still be accessed by these layer 2s to kind of almost root liquidity. But users don't have to pay for it anymore because they're interacting on layer 2s. Similarly, if you're trading on Deversifi at the moment, you're mainly using the order book, but that has an aggregated liquidity from also some centralized exchanges. So you get really good prices. And in 2 or 3 weeks' time, we'll be launching AMM pools. So it's also super easy to provide liquidity on a lot more tokens, very similar to the way it works now on Sushi Swap or Uniswap. But instead here, you don't need to pay any gas costs to participate in that. So it's open to much smaller, even if you only have $100 of fund, it could still then make sense. And I think that's the big difference, is that things then become a lot more accessible, and the size of the community can therefore be much bigger, which I think is, as you mentioned, kind of be a really important thing for sort of maintaining and growing the protocol. I think it's something that Polygon did really well, but a lot of the other, maybe let's say layer 2s haven't yet done. And so that's, I think, going to be one of the big differentiators for different solutions.
And Will, how does Deversifi handle those types of transactions? Is it, and I'm assuming it's not, I guess in this case, you guys aren't bridging an asset or liquidity from L1 when someone wants to make that trade on your L2. Is it a smart order router that'll then execute on both exchanges? Or do you guys bridge assets to fill an order on L2?
It kind of depends. There's a few different solutions, but the fundamental building block that's used is something called a conditional transfer, which is a really basically magic cryptographic transaction that exists in the scaling solution that Deversifi is built on. So if you're someone who has your funds on layer 2, you essentially sign this type of transaction, which gives permission for, for example, your funds to go to someone else, but only if a certain transaction happens on Ethereum layer 1. And when the kind of future, basically where at a certain point in the future, that will be verified on layer 1. And if it didn't happen, your transaction won't be valid. So a really simple example of this is, let's say you have some Ethereum on Deversifi and you want to make a trade on Uniswap to get the best, because that might be where the best price is for a certain token. You sign this transaction to send your ETH to someone else. And that person then makes the trade on Uniswap on layer 1 for you. And only if it's successful can they receive your funds on layer 2. Anyway, so as you can see, it's kind of a complicated scenario, but it's actually really beautiful in terms of what it means you can do, because it means that you can then interact with anything on layer 1 without paying the gas cost on Deversifi. And that's what we built some of these integrations around.
Gotcha.
I appreciate how you describe that conditional transfer. It's basically like magic. Yeah. Thanks for not getting too technical.
That's the problem when you go too much into some of this cryptography, is that it kind of ends up boiling down for end users to magic, but with the security of of the blockchain. But hopefully that still made some sense.
Yeah. It definitely did. I mean, is there a scenario where an aggregator could be able to use this exact quote unquote magic that we're talking about to basically aggregate liquidity from Deversifi for a trade, as well as other dexes on Starkware or other dexes on other, even other sidechains or other rollups? Or, is the aggregator space kind of only for specific chains or rollups?
That's exactly something that we've spoken a lot about. Our development team is really excited about that concept. And actually it's kind of almost been prototyped out, but it doesn't exist yet. I think that is how the ecosystem might look 6 months to a year from now. It's hard to predict exactly when, but very much that aggregators, I think, will take into account all these different layer twos and also be able to access them. And this concept I talked about with the conditional transfers can be used to achieve that as well.
Yeah, a more general question here on the same topic is how do we get the most composable approach to the segmented sidechains? Background being, we've seen the Polygon SDK. This allows different protocols to build their own sidechain, bringing about that application type of chain future that we talked about with different segmented chains. The holdup being, we still need to unite all of these chains if we want to tap into the liquidity across different chains. So what is the best approach for, I guess, building towards a unified set of chains? Maybe it's this magical conditional transfer type of contract. And I guess I was just kind of, looking for your thoughts on the Polygon SDK, if you had any, and the best way to kind of, aggregate liquidity across all of these different chains.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think it's something where, and kind of putting aside the Polygon SDK for a moment, I think it's something which is most easily looked at through the lens of Ethereum versus Cosmos and Polkadot, actually. So Ethereum was built as like a completely open, very flexible, but basic computer essentially for the entire world. And because it was so flexible and open and had a language like Solidity and the EVM, any developers could build anything on it. And they have done. And they started building DeFi and they started building layer 2 solutions. And because it's kind of entirely open, we've had 10 or 20 or probably 100 different layer 2 scaling solutions being built by teams all over the world without any coordination. And therefore we've got all these different solutions that are kind of competing with each other, but without like some coordinated vision for how they connect, how you move funds between them, how it will end up being in 2 or 3 years from now. There's no kind of master plan almost. It's a very organic, almost like Darwinian evolution where the best chains will win or the best layer 2s will win. And it's kind of, from that point of view, unplanned, but really powerful because it means we get all this competition and the best things will end up winning. Whereas if you look at Polkadot or Cosmos, which is kind of the opposite, they looked ahead, like I think when they were being developed, and said, okay, 2 or 3 years from now, probably we're going to have a multi-chain ecosystem. People are going to want to build all sorts of different chains and they're going to want to connect together and let people move funds. And so both of those two basically designed their blockchains to be built around that idea. So in the Cosmos example, they have 𝗵𝗵 and all these different almost like side chains can connect and let you move funds between them. And it was like, that was like built into the original design. Same with Polkadot, like that's kind of part of its design parameters. And so we're now seeing like almost a competition between these two ideas of where it was purposely designed and where it's happening organically. And I think Polkadot and Cosmos were both right that this would be how the ecosystem developed. But Ethereum has kind of adapted to that by doing it organically. And I actually do think that's going to, like, it's hard to predict how it's going to end up, but I think we'll see the best solutions win and naturally bridges start to connect them. I don't think it will be like something that we can plan out or predict exactly how it will look, but I think it will work because that's already been proven that this stuff just happens on its own almost.
Right. Yeah, it is a Darwinistic concept. And that's ultimately how we've gotten here, even all the way up to this podcast, really. It's crazy to see the evolution of these concepts and the way that protocols and builders have thought through the vision, as you've explained with Cosmos and Polkadot, and tried to create protocols for their specific vision, even though there are all sorts of different things playing out at once. And, the same thing can be applied to your vision of what's coming and what's being built at Deversifi. So, I guess to kind of wrap us up here, some quick updates on what's going on at Deversifi, what to expect, over the coming weeks and months in building this layer 2, this exchange and this own protocol to provide this experience for users. What are we building? What are we working on?
Yeah, so the most exciting thing that's happening in Deversifi right now is that we've spent nearly 2 years building out the protocol and the exchange and Deversifi as it is today. And now we're handing it over to the community. So last week, we released the Dvf token, which is the governance token for Deversifi. It happened through a Deversifi launch market, which was essentially similar to a Balancer launch pool, where it was a really fair way of people getting these tokens, and all the funds raised are going to a community treasury, which rather than like to our team. So it's all completely like by the community for the community. And the next 3 weeks are going to be basically launching AMM pools. So basically making it really easy for people to provide liquidity on Deversifi and then to these DVF governance tokens by doing it. So there'll be an airdrop to any active Deversifi users of DVF tokens. And there'll also be liquidity mining for anyone who provides liquidity once liquidity mining starts. So there's going to be a lot of ways for people to kind of really engage and be part of what we've built. And we kind of see this as like almost the next few months is us taking the protocol that we launched and handing it over to DVF token holders. So it's kind of like exciting for us as a team because suddenly there's a lot more people involved. We're already having loads of people starting to engage and like have even better ideas than we've had about where Deversifi should go. So that's just really cool from our perspective. And the launch of these AMM pools is going to be huge. After that, most of our team will be focusing on mobile and like increasing the number of ways that people can access Deversifi, but there'll be a huge community treasury that's governed completely by token holders. So a lot of the like future development of the protocol will be led by that DAO community.
Yeah, it'll be super interesting to see how that process goes, going from a centralized governance style to a decentralized one. I know that's been a rocky road for some other protocols, but y'all have been building for a couple of years now, and with a community, as you mentioned, that's very strong. I'm sure you guys won't have any trouble. For anyone who's still listening, maybe if you were a little bit distracted by all the technical layer 2 discussion and weren't able to follow, alarm bells might be going off in your head now because Will mentioned the airdrop. So if you're still figuring out how to get involved in DeFi and not really sure where to start, airdrops are a great way to just get your hands dirty, get your feet in the water, and get some tokens in your wallet that you can start experimenting with, contribute to some governance proposals, trade on the exchange, get different rewards, and participate in farming. So yeah, if you guys are a little bit unfamiliar with kind of how to navigate things, go over to Deversifi, get started, and claim that airdrop, because who knows? We've seen airdrops do very well, and I'm sure Deversifi won't be any different.
Sweet. Will, thank you so much for coming on, man. It was an absolute pleasure to chat about all things layer 2 and Deversifi. There are some key takeaways from this conversation that I know our community will highly benefit from, and yours as well. So thanks, man, and keep on building.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was really fun.
Thanks for listening to the DeFi by Design podcast. Until next time, DeFi Slate Team.